Hey there, in this training, we're going to be talking about how to use warm and cool color. In other words, how to use temperature, the temperature of the color, to create both form and light. So let's dive in. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about. Oops, it's not going to advance. So in nature, light creates the color. When you're working in a painting, color creates the light. That is one of the many quotes that I use from Hans Hofmann. So I want to repeat it because I want it to really sink in. In nature, light creates the color. In the picture, color creates the light. What that translates to in regular language is that when we're outside or inside observing, we're seeing light fall across objects. And the light falling across those objects creates our perception of color. Whereas in a painting, we create the illusion of light and form through how we manipulate color. So the two are intimately tied together. And in this training, we're going to be talking about how to use color, particularly temperature, to do those things. So what we'll be covering in looking at the key to using temperature to create a sense of strong light and form is the difference between the physical color of objects and our perception of that color. In other words, between local color and optical color. The difference between warm and cool colors, where they fall on the color wheel, the basic separation of those two ideas. Then we'll talk about something that's even more important, relative temperature, how to use the relative warmth and coolness of color, which means the coolness or the temperature of a color in relation to the color it's next to. That's the real key to creating light and form. Then last, I want you to become really sensitive to those relationships of colors and learn how to compare, always compare. Compare what you're looking at for those differences, for the relationships, and then look at the paint, literally, that you're mixing on your palette and make sure that you've got those same relationships there. That's how you create form. That's how you create light. So let's get a definition of those two things first. Light is a sense of illumination. It's the sense that there is illumination emanating out from what you're looking at. Form is a sense of dimensionality, in particular, three-dimensionality. It's the three-dimensional aspect of an object. Color creates both things. And remember, we're focusing today just on temperature. There are four aspects to color. There's hue, value, intensity, and temperature. But we're going to really look at just temperature because there's enough there to make a huge, big difference. So when you're looking at light and looking at form, the key to creating that strong sense is to use strong contrast between light and dark, that's value, bright and dull, that's intensity, and warm and cool, that's temperature. So I want you to look for a second, and I'm gonna get my annotation tool down here, get a good intense color here so that you can see it. So I've got a square that I've drawn here, and over here, right here is the sun. So the sun beats down and it strikes our square on the front face of the square. That side is going to appear to be lighter than the side that's in shadow, which will appear to be darker, even though we know they both have the same physical color. That is the difference between what we know is the physical color and how we perceive, one of the first ways we perceive it, one of the first differences. Now, this is assuming that the light is warm. If the light is cool, then that front face is going to be lighter but it's going to be cooler in color. And the shadow is going to be warmer in color because the shadow is the opposite temperature of the highlight. Let me say that again. The shadow is the opposite temperature of the highlight. So the highlight is the physical color of the object with the color of the light mixed into it. Hold that thought for a minute because we're going to go into it a little bit deeper. I want to plant the seed of understanding there so that it'll make sense to you when we look at some examples of that in a painting. But right now, remember that the light striking the front face of the subject is going to be lighter, brighter, and generally warmer. The shadow side is going to be darker, duller, and cooler. So I want to mention just then the difference between local color and optical color. Local color is the physical color of the object. It's the inherent color property that is embedded in that object. It is altered, and we see optical effects based on the color of the light. Remember I said if we have warm light, that front face is going to be warm. If we have cool light, it's going to be cool. That's called optical color. Optical color is our perceived color. It's the way we actually physically perceive color. We don't just perceive the local color. And that's where a lot of people go wrong. It's one of the biggest problems I see in people's paintings. So this is a set of examples that I use inside CCL, the Composition, Color, and Light course. The photograph you see here is of a building on the campus of Columbia College where I used to teach. I could see that right out my window. Late afternoon, November light, late October, November light. The light that time of year is very warm, especially that time of day. And it's a warm, almost red-orange. It's an orange light. And the angle of it's really low, so it's striking almost right on the building. Where we see that illumination on this red brick is affected by the color of the light. And so it appears more orange than brick red. Those bricks are standard red brick. But where the light's striking, it appears orange. Where it's in shadow, it appears violet. Yet, if you paint that using local color only, which means you're going to mix white to get your lights and black to get your darks, it's not going to look the same. That's what I did in the example on the right. That's using local color. And you can see it looks flat and it doesn't resemble the actual colors that you see. When you're using local color, you're only manipulating value. You're not manipulating intensity and temperature. And so you get flatter light and flatter space. In the painting below that, you can see an example of optical color, where the strong light striking the building, the sense of it is created through using truly an orange paint, not brick red. There's actually no brick red in that painting at all. It's using an orange paint in both of those little triangular shaped areas that are catching the light. The color for the shadows is a violet. So I want you to understand, make sure you understand, post some questions if you have any into the membership underneath this video. If you have any questions about that difference between local color and optical color. So if you begin to understand how to use temperature, you are well on your way to using optical color. And you'll have far, far richer paintings. Oops, still have my annotation tool up. So we're talking about creating light and form through temperature. You throw in intensity as well, you'll be golden. So we're going to be talking about what temperature is. Temperature can be defined as the apparent warmth or coolness of a color. It's not physically hot or cold, but in our mind, it's a psychological aspect. We associate warm colors with things that we've touched that have warmth, and cool colors with things that we've touched that have a coolness to them. And here you can see an example of a cool color and a warm color. The ultramarine blue swatch on the left is very cool in relation to the orange on the right. So when we're talking about the differences between warm and cool colors, the very first one is where they fall on the color wheel. And you can actually divide the color wheel roughly in half, and you can push all the colors on one side to warm and all the colors on the other side to cool. And where you perceive that dividing line to a certain extent is determined by whether you see red as being the warmest color or orange being the warmest color, blue being the coolest, or green. That's a very personal, inherent biological response. About half the world sees it as red and half the world sees it as orange. I perceive red as being the warmest and green as being the coolest. So I'm going to talk about it in reference to that. All of this has to do with the color bars, which are the color receptors inside of your eye. They transmit color information to your brain. So we can all perceive color just a little bit differently based on those receptors. The way I perceive it is dividing right down that line between the warm red and the cool red and the green down at the bottom. So everything to the left is warmer, everything to the right is cooler. And that's the general split. But I want you to go back to what I said, the warm red and the cool red, because that goes to that relationship between two colors. Anytime you've got two colors, you can compare their apparent warmth and coolness. And that is a far more useful thing for painters than simply just dividing the color wheel in half. That's the beginning of understanding the difference between warm and cool. But the real key is understanding the relative warmth and coolness of a color. It still goes back to the color wheel, but it goes back to, is the color that you're comparing closer to red or closer to green? So for example, when we look at two blues, yes, you can have a cool blue and a warm blue. So we have two blues right here. This first one is ultramarine. The second one is phthalo. So that's phthalo, and this is ultramarine. Ultramarine is considered a warm blue because it is slightly violet. It's got a little tiny bit of red in it, which means it's closer to red. Phthalo blue, now I use Williamsburg. It only has one phthalo. Some brands have green shade and red shade. I'm talking about the green shade. Phthalo blue is closer to green. So ultramarine blue is warmer. See where its position is on the color wheel. Phthalo blue is cooler. See its position on the color wheel. So looking at those relative temperature relationships mean I could create form and space and light just by using two blues. Radical thought there, huh? You're going to see that in action in just a second because I've got an example for you that uses that exact concept to create the sense of form and space in the clouds. So let's look at the oranges here. So orange is right in the middle, and to the right we have red orange. To the left we have yellow orange. Yellow is less warm than orange. It's a little slight bit cooler than orange. So here we have differences in hue, but we also have differences in temperature, relative differences in temperature, just like those differences I just talked about with the blues. So when we're looking at creating that in a painting, you want to mix colors for your painting that not only have differences in value, but differences in temperature. I'll go back to my annotation tool again. So for these blues, this is more of an ultramarine blue. It's ultramarine and white. This one is phthalo blue and white. Then this one down here is lighter, but it's still phthalo blue and white. Actually has a little tiny bit of yellow in it. So this is warmer. This is cooler in comparison to each other here. But if I compare the two phthalo blues to each other, then this one is warmer. Oops, got that wrong, got it the opposite way. I'm going to confuse y'all. So the pure phthalo blue and white mixture is cooler in relationship to the one that has yellow in it, which veers slightly over into the warmth. This makes sense? So we've got warm, cool, warm there. Note that again. Warm, relative warmth, to cool, to relative warmth. And you're going to see those three colors in the painting I'm about to show you. Now, look at the grays down here too. And we have a warm and a cool gray. And then a warm gray in relationship to this gray. Warm, cool, warm. You see how I'm setting myself up to be able to create both light and form. So I want you to see that in the actual painting. And then we'll pop back to the palette as well. Here's the painting, the final painting. And you can see in the clouds up here where I've used warm and cool color relationships, relative warmth and coolness, to create the sense of clouds having three-dimensional form and of being struck by light, the early morning light. You can see the same thing happening on the land, but I want to focus here in particular on the clouds, because I know clouds are something that most people have questions about. And it's because you need to think about cloud forms, cloud shapes, in the same way you think about the land forms. So that's one of the reasons I picked this painting as the example. So I want you to be able to look at how those are impacted by using warm and cool color relationships. So here's that palette again that we just looked at. And you can see that full range. These are just the colors for the clouds. You can see that full range of relative warmth and relative coolness in each separate color. So let's move across the canvas here. This should play. And you should be able to see as we get in close, zoom in close, those warm and cool colors juxtaposed against each other. When you're up this close, it's not going to create the illusion of form. That requires stepping back, moving back some. Then you get that illusion of form. Let's go back to that original painting here. So overlapping as you move from one color to the next, warm, cool, warm, cool. So you're juxtaposing relative warmth and coolness next to each other. It's the key to making that form. It's the key to making that sense of light. So I have one other example here to show you. And it's a really, really quick study. I know I've used it before. You may have seen it before. It's one of my favorite examples. The really terrible photo on the left is one I took during an actual, it's a really bad photo, but almost that same time of year I described earlier. And the light was late afternoon light, almost sunset. And it's into November when the light, late November, when the light is very, very red orange. You can see how much more red it is here than in that earlier shot of the building. It's the only time I've been able to capture that on pine trees like that, so that you can see that when the light strikes something that has a relatively neutral surface, like the pine tree, the light becomes red, red, orange. Now in my painting, I made it more orange than red because it's still hard to paint it with that red and have people believe it. There's a lack of your brain believing that that's what you really saw. But that's why I have that photograph next to the quick study that I did on the right. So where the light was striking those pine trees, my easel was just a little bit over from where I took the photograph. Wherever the light struck, the sort of taupe, lavender taupe color of the tree instantly transforms to orange. So you get a feeling for the light as it strikes. I want you to also notice that there are two different greens here, just as you can see in the photo. Where the light is not striking, you've got a very saturated green, almost slightly blue-green. Then where the light is striking becomes an almost sage green. It's a very, very warm green. Not very intense, but very warm. And the contrast between those two greens also helps to create that strong sense of illumination. So I want you to remember to paint what you see, the optical color, not what you know, which is the physical color or the local color. As soon as you start doing that, your paintings are going to be filled with light and with form. Also, I want you to become very sensitive, both in your eye and in the way you mix color, to the relationships of color. Always compare. Always compare. Compare what you're seeing with your eyeballs and compare what you're mixing on your palette. When you do that, when you compare the differences in colors to each other, you'll create that illusion of light and form. In this painting of the pine trees here, again, pines are relatively neutral in their inherent physical color. But when they're struck by warm light, they light up, literally. In the shadows, they're much cooler. Oops. So let's just review really quickly here what we've been covering, because I want you to go put it into practice. We've talked about the difference between the physical color of objects and our perception of that color. Remember, that's called local color and optical color. We're moving away from local color and we're moving towards optical color, which means we're going to take into account the impact of the color of the light on the physical color of the objects. We've talked about the overall difference between warm and cool colors. Remember, I said it's usually split right down the line between red and green. Everything on the color wheel that's to the left is warm. Everything to the right is cool. Then I've talked about relative warmth and coolness of colors, which is how you can actually have a warm blue and a cool blue, a warm red and a cool red, a warm yellow and a cool yellow. Becoming sensitive to those relationships, that's how you create form. That's how you create light. So I would love to see you all work on that some this month. My challenge for you is to create some simple 20-minute paintings. If you're not sure how to do a 20-minute painting, We'll put the link in here to the daily painting challenge, and you can get the info on how to do a 20-minute painting. But 20 to 40-minute paintings are really quick where you're not concerned about rendering so much as you are about simply getting the overall colors blocked in. Because I want you to block in for light and form using warm and cool colors. So that's your challenge. Do a couple of 20 to 40-minute paintings that explore using temperature to create light and form. Share those here in the membership so that we can learn from each other. Because remember, we go further, faster together. We are greater together than by ourselves. Hope this has helped. I want to remind everybody to paint on. Happy painting, everybody. Bye-bye for now.